All right, go live. Welcome to Introduction to IBC Chapter 9, Fire Protection and Life Safety Systems. And that's the first change. Used to be just fire protection systems. Now it's fire protection and life safety systems. This was supposed to begin at noon, but of course it's 12:15. As always, we begin the objectives, know the applicable codes and reference standards, code issues. Know in what circumstances a sprinkler system is required. Know the benefits of a sprinkler system in reduced fire resistance ratings and extended exit access travel distance. Know in what circumstances a fire alarm system is required. Know in what circumstances a fire detection system is required. Know in what circumstances a fire command center is required. And know what information must be on our drawings. Well, we're probably not going to get to that one today. Although Connecticut has not adopted the 2021 system of ICC codes, that will happen very soon, and so that is the code that we are using. The principles are the same, and the section numbers are usually pretty much the same. Connecticut amends the 2021 International Residential Code to delete sprinkler requirements. So that's not one of the referenced codes. In the model code, it says that 1 and 2 family and townhouses shall be sprinklered, and Connecticut deletes that requirement. The 2021 International Building Code and Connecticut amends Chapter 9. We are using the issue of the amendments that was issued for public comment. As there was very little public comment, we are assuming, and the codes and standards put out what it was they wanted to do, we are assuming that once it gets through legislative review by October 1st, it'll be pretty much the same. If it's not, we'll let you know. Referenced standards. NFPA 10 Standard for Portable Fire Extinguishers, 2021 edition. NFPA 13 Standard for the Installation of Sprinkler Systems, 2019 edition. NFPA 13R Standard for the Installation of Sprinkler Systems in Low-Rise Residential Occupancies, 2019 edition. And although I don't list it here, and later on I will reference NFPA 13D, which is for 1 and 2 family, because there are some occupancies where Connecticut lets you use that instead of either of the other two. NFPA 14 Standard for the Installation of Standpipe and Hose Systems, a 2019 edition. And NFPA 72 National Fire Alarm and Signaling Code, 2019 edition. We are not going to get into the details of those things today. We're barely going to get through what I planned. Not in the scope of the presentation. Alternative automatic fire extinguishing systems, and I'm telling that we're not doing that because that question had come up in a previous lunch and learn. Emergency alarm systems. Now, an emergency alarm system isn't an interior alarm system like in a building. It's like out in the field. So we're not going to study that. Smoke control systems. those might be used, for instance, in a mall, where there's this great big open area and they want to get the smoke out, or another great big open area, an atrium. I had to observe the test of a smoke control system when we did the DOT headquarters in Newington, but we're not going to learn about that today. Smoke and heat removal, fire department connections. We're not going to learn a lot about fire pumps today. Emergency responder safety features, gas detection systems. These are all important systems.
Hello. Can you join in the meeting? I'll put you on speaker.
Mass notification systems. Maybe I'm getting the emergency systems mixed up. Well, it doesn't matter. We're not doing it. And 918, emergency responder communication coverage. It's been deleted in Connecticut. However, we have had to do this in Massachusetts. And the idea is that once you get into a large building, the firefighters may have difficulty communicating if you do not have built into it a wireless system where they can use their walkie-talkies. That outside they would have no trouble, but inside they would have trouble. So, and we had to do that at Williamstown. Okay. I'm not going to go to the code right away. You start out in section 901, which is general. Threads for fire department connections. One of the reasons you'd want to have a fire department connection is you might need to get water from the system to fight the fire outside. And sometimes if you had a standpipe and it wasn't pressurized quite enough, it was an old system, and you wanted to pressurize the system, you could hook a tanker up to that. So they just say you got to cooperate with the local fire department in getting the right connection.
Also, if
and they want to tell you where it is.
Also, if the fire is long-standing, they can always daisy chain like 10, 12 fire trucks back to back and just connect everything to the standpipe.
Acceptance tests, 901.5, those are found in NFPA 13 and NFPA 72. Supervisory service. If there's a fire going on in your building, the local fire department wants to know about it. So they have requirements for sending whatever signals you're getting to your fire alarm control panel back to the fire department. All right, let's go to 901.7 fire areas. Where buildings or portions thereof are divided into fire areas so as not to exceed the limits established for requiring a fire protection system in accordance with its chapter, such fire areas shall be separated by firewalls constructed in accordance with Section 706, fire barriers constructed in accordance with Section 707, or horizontal assemblies constructed in accordance with Section 711, or a combination thereof, having a fire resistance rating of not less than that determined in accordance with Section 707. Okay, so we probably wouldn't use firewalls because that's a kind of a basic decision that you make to divide a structure into buildings. That's what that would be used for. We have most frequently used fire barriers. For instance, at AJ's project in in Suffield.
Yeah.
He wanted to introduce an A2 use. It was a small building, but a sizable building. And the problem is when you don't have the fire barriers as defined by section 707, that assembly use is considered to occupy the entire building. Well, when you occupy the entire building, even though you're only over in this little corner, now you've suddenly got to sprinkler the whole building. But if you can put the appropriate fire barriers at the appropriate location, then you can reduce the fire area so they don't have to have sprinklers at all. So that's the idea. Okay, let's look at 902. Fire pump and riser room size. And I don't want to go into the details of this. I just want you to know that when you're laying out a building and you've made a determination that it needs a sprinkler system, it's going to have the risers are going to have to be someplace. And one of the things we'll talk about is, okay, if the pressure in the street isn't sufficient, then you need to have a fire pump. Okay, now the fire pump has to have a place to live. And so this is where you go to figure out how big where that room has to be and how big it needs to be. As an architect, you're not going to be designing the fire pump. You just have to give somebody a place to put it. We weren't going to talk about alternative protection, and we're not, except to say that Connecticut has amended that section 903.1.1. In any occupancy where the character of fuel for fire is such that extinguishment or control of fire is accomplished by a type of alternative automatic extinguishing system complying with section 904, such system shall be permitted in lieu of an automatic sprinkler system and shall be installed in accordance with the applicable standard and approved by the code official. The code official, this is not a mandate to him to approve it. It's a mandate to him to approve its use, but he still has to review it and check it out and make sure that it's right. So other methods are permitted. Okay. (903.2) automatic sprinkler systems where required, and we're only going to give you a selection for the things that we use most often. So I gave this link actually works in at least it works for me in the document. But that goes to the IBC, and Connecticut has, and I've included this in here because Connecticut has amended it extensively to permit, especially with regard to this exception, where it's an existing restaurants and existing non-sprinklered buildings, and if they're gonna expand, they can go up to 12,000 square feet instead of being limited to 5,000 square feet of fire area. And group A2, that's any assembly occupancy that has food service. That's part of it. So this is something that's, you know, a small restaurant might get included in this. All right, let's go to group A3, 903.2.1.3. Okay, and you can see what they did. The limitations on a Group A3 occupancy, such as library, meeting rooms, things like that, they can go up to 12,000 square feet. So what Connecticut did in its amendment was basically say an existing restaurant can have the same fire area as we would permit a new A3 area, a new A3 fire area. So that goes up to 12,000 square feet. Assembly occupancy on roofs, and the reason that I'm including this one is because we recently had an assembly occupancy on a roof at that golf land in Vernon. So let's look at that. It's 2.1.6. Where an occupied roof has an assembly occupancy with an occupant load exceeding 100 for Group A2 and 300 for others, all floors between the occupied roof and the level of exit discharge shall be equipped with an automatic sprinkler system, exception being open parking garages. So that particular these rooftop restaurants are very popular now, and so what it's saying, if you have a small one, and because small ones are popular too, if it's small, then you don't have to sprinkler what's below it. But if you know, as it gets bigger, you got to make sure that it's sprinklered. The one we did in Vernon was hundreds and hundreds of people. Now I'm going to stay right this one on multiple fire areas. An automatic sprinkler system shall be provided for multiple fire areas of A1, 2, 3, or 4 share exit or exit components, and the combined occupant load of these fire areas is 300 or more. And that's sort of to make the it's sort of to keep people honest, because you can, oh, I have a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here, and I can get away with it. It says no. If you're sharing exits, even if you create separate fire areas, you get up over 300, you still have to provide a sprinkler system. And I think that's a reasonable limit. Group B, ambulatory care facilities. Now, example, proton therapy in Danbury. And this is a case where you have to ask questions, because if you learned about what it was they were doing, you would say, oh, nobody's ever going to be asleep. Nobody's ever going to be sedated. But so you have to ask the question, is it possible for 4 or more patients to be sedated at any one time? And since the answer was yes, then the answer is, even though this is an ambulatory care facility, you walk in, you walk out, now it has to be fully sprinklered. And that's the reason. I'm sure that they wanted it fully sprinkled for other reasons, but that's what would require it.
It also goes into other things, right, about fire alarms and stuff like that, if you're going to have
Ambulatory care, that's right. Okay, Group B. And I've put the link up there for anybody who happens to use this, but in Connecticut, it's a statutory requirement. Group E occupancies shall be sprinklered. When it's in the statute, it means it can't be modified. It means you have to do it if it meets the criteria of Group E. So we had a situation like this the other day, and it's a building that we've worked on before. We had a restaurant that was expanding in that, and we had to put in a firewall so it didn't have to be a fire barrier, so it didn't have to be sprinklered. Well, the adjacent tenant space we had done for an office, and now the Board of Education was moving some space in. So, and once again, you have to ask the question. If it's just going to be Board of Education offices, if they're going to be doing curriculum or something like that, or they're going to have just a few kids in there, less, 6 or fewer, have to look. I think it's 6 or fewer. Then it's not considered an educational occupancy. It's just still a business occupancy. You don't have to sprinkler. But when you go over that, now it's an educational occupancy, must be sprinklered. So I asked the question, are there going to be any kids in there? He's the, who am I talking to? I'm talking to the landlord. He doesn't know, so he asked the Board of Education. They're going to start with 15 kids, and then it maybe go up to 30. That's an educational occupancy. And it's out in Ellington, there's no city water, so I said, you're going to have to sprinkler this. And you can avoid sprinklering the whole building because we had put up the necessary fire barrier on one side as part of the restaurant, but you'll have to make the other demising wall a 2-hour fire barrier so that you just have to sprinkler that space. So these things come up all the time. And one of the things I want to emphasize is you're always asking questions. What are the potential problems in this, and what are the potential solutions? Let's go to group F1. It says also read the subsections 903.2.4. Okay, so a group F1 occupancy, it's very similar to the A3. If the fire area exceeds 12,000 square feet, it's more than 3 stories above grade, and the combined area of all F1 fire areas exceeds 24,000 square feet. So in other words, you can have 2 fire areas, but you can't put another one. At that point, you'd have to put a fire wall, because now it's separate buildings. So, and this has come up in projects that we've worked on. Industrial condos. You're going to have these little startups, or maybe people who are never planning not to get any bigger. They just need an industrial space of their own, and it gets to a certain point, 12,000 square feet, then it has to have sprinklers, but if you put the fire barrier in, you can avoid them.
Yeah.
So it's...
You did that in Burkan, right?
Yeah. So that's group F1, and of course there's special requirements for woodworking, distilled spirits, and upholstered furniture. But we don't have to go into the details, you just need to know that it's there. Group H is a whole separate topic. We'll take that up in maybe 1 or 2 sessions and learn how to handle Group H, because it's in a lot of what would otherwise be considered F1 occupancies. What was that? What was that one we did out in Putnam?
Paul Life Sciences.
Yeah, Paul Life Sciences. They had for most of it, it was just manufactured. There was a little piece that had to be separated that was H2.
And all kinds of alcohol and whatnot that they were storing in a big room. And then there was, I guess FM Global also we should mention, Tom. FM Global, I don't know how it ties into this. That's like a private requirement though, right?
Well, FM Global, those requirements are insurance requirements. In other words, what we do is we have to design to the code.
Yeah.
We can make recommendations for code modifications for lesser requirements if we think they're not justified, or we can make recommendations for additional requirements if it's not, but we have to comply with the code.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you want to get your financing, you have to get insurance. And if you're going to get insurance, you have to meet the requirements of the insurer.
Yeah.
So since it's an industrial occupancy, very likely to be FM Global, and they're going to have their own requirements.
They're usually more stringent than the code. In some cases.
They usually track pretty closely, and then there's certain things that they have had experience with that they want to reduce their exposure on.
Yeah.
All right, we don't do too much Group I, but you have to think of institutional occupancies. It's just like Group R. People will be sleeping there, so they have the similar requirements. And while we're here, the only thing that's different, I think, about Group M in the Connecticut Code is that they add a number 4 down here. So let's see what that is. Also read the subsection and the Connecticut Amendment. I don't think I copied that in here, but we'll. Connecticut amends that section. All right, Group R. And Connecticut also amends this extensively. That's why I've included it in here. But we have the we have these documents. And the reason that they're changing it throughout all newly constructed buildings with a Group R fire area. Okay, that's the same as the code. But now they're emphasizing in existing buildings that have a Group R fire area newly introduced by change of occupancy, occupancy group designation, or by an addition. And they're really just emphasizing you should be able to figure this out from the International Existing Building Code, because it says that if you have a change of occupancy where an R for sprinklers is almost always up from anything else, that you have to have the sprinkler system. So it's newly introduced in existing buildings. Group R1 bed and breakfast establishments. Bed and breakfast, there were so many people that wanted to convert historic houses into a bed and breakfast, and there was a fight every time. And so they were writing code modification after code. Eventually they got one standard code modification. They would just automatically grant that to anybody asked for it. And finally they said, we're just changing the code. So it's a whole special category. And I suppose at some point it'll, something that might go into the model codes. And so there's all these exceptions, and you just have to know that those are there to use. And I'm also saying C903.2.8.4 for care facilities. That's in Group I. 903.2.8. All right, let's look at Group S1. Once again, you get the fire area over 12,000 square feet, more than 3 stories above grade. The combined area exceeds 24,000 square feet. And a Group S1 fire area used for the storage of commercial motor vehicles where the fire area exceeds 5,000 square feet. So that's it for S1, but there's additional requirements for storage of tires. We ran into that recently.
Last year in East Stratford.
Yeah, over on Burnside, it was a little building, and it was going to be a tire repair shop, and so they were just it was a small space, but they had this tires just stored all over the place. There was no practical limit on how high they could be stored or where. So we created an area so that when the fire marshal walked into the building, he could see that the tires were only stored in that area, and that they were only piled up to 6 feet high.
Yeah, so we had to essentially build a cage with chicken.
It didn't have to be rated. It just had to be a defined area where you could say this is the maximum limit, and we went to whatever the limit was for the storage of tires. Okay, so Connecticut has some additional statutory requirements. Shall be installed in any building or structure to be built more than 4 stories tall. In other words, more than 4, so it's 5 stories and above. I haven't gone through and studied if there were any that would be permitted under the code in another circumstance and not be sprinklered. It's possible. For instance, an unlimited, you could have an unlimited area, an unlimited height and area of a construction type 1A building. And you can build a building that is not a high-rise. High-rise buildings have to be sprinklered. But you can build a building that is not high-rise, of type 1A construction, but because of this statute, 5 stories, you still have to sprinkler it in Connecticut. Massachusetts is the other thing. What they do is they say, okay, yes, you must sprinkler a high-rise building, but they change the definition of high-rise building so that it's lower. They have different ways of approaching the issue. Okay, so that's where they are required. That's where they're required. Okay, now it deals, 903.3 deals with installation requirements. So there's 903.3.1.1, 903.3.1.2, and 903.3.1.3. Point 3 is for 13D systems, point 2 is for 13R systems, and this is the one that we use almost all the time for NFPA 13. Exempt locations is amended by Connecticut. And there's certain rooms or areas that don't have to be protected, have sprinkler protection, and the building can still be considered fully sprinklered. And bathrooms don't usually have to be sprinkled, but sometimes, like in schools or some other public facilities, it might be a good idea, because that's a place where people could start a nuisance fire or a reckless burning or arson or something. So, like I said, maybe you get out of it by the code, but we still want it for other reasons. Okay, so here we have the 13R systems, and it gives you the circumstances. So this would basically be low-rise apartment buildings. When you have to sprinkler balconies and decks, corridors and balconies, and the means of egress and attics. Let's see what those have to say. 312. Shall be provided for exterior balconies. Shall be provided in corridors and for balconies and the means of egress where any of the following conditions occurs. So these are requirements for attics. Attic protection shall be provided. Intended for living purposes or storage shall be protected by an automatic sprinkler system. We're located in a building of type 3, 4, or 5 construction. So you have some choices in combustible construction for how you handle attics in 13R. Automatic sprinkler systems installed in 1 and 2 family dwellings, Group R3, Group R4, Group R4 Condition 1, and townhouses. As I said, in Connecticut, the 1 and 2 family in the townhouses, there's not a requirement. Group R4 is for small care facilities. There's some sections, and we won't go deeply into these. Quick response in residential sprinklers. There's certain times that you have to have. Obviously, in a residence, you'd have to have residential sprinklers. Sprinklers have been extensively experimented with. They test the spray pattern. They test how far it can go. How much they want to, whether they want it to go far, whether they want it to be concentrated, how big the droplets are going to be. Early suppression, fast response sprinklers, for instance, that would be like being under a heavy shower. You turn on the shower to full, it'd be like having that. Yeah. Whereas some residential sprinklers, it might be just a mist. All they want is to just get a little bit. And the idea in residential sprinklers is they want to be able to save the person in the room of fire origin. Because the sprinklers that were all developed for warehouses and factories and things, which is the first places that they were used, they just wanted to put the fire out, warn the people, and people get out. Residential sprinklers have a different function. So they've been tested so that they can do that. And usually it's for somebody smoking in bed. They want to respond quickly enough that they can save the person even when they're stupid. I know these sessions should be free of editorial comments, but there you are. Obstructed locations.
Stairs or attics?
Well, we ran into this at Pompano Beach. We were doing, it was a fall protection system so that people could get up on top of the buses and wash them. But what it meant was that in order to get that room, you had to move some of the ducts around. So in the course of moving the ducts around, they had to flatten the ducts like this So they got bigger like this, and now, whereas before, sprinkler head here, sprinkler head here, it was going to cover the floor. They were just wide enough so that it was going to obstruct the sprinkler heads. Now you had to, redo the redo the sprinkler system. I mean, this is one of those cascading things. It starts out with a little problem about how to, give a guy a rope so he doesn't fall off the bus, and it ends up as, So, but that's the idea. You can't obstruct the sprinkler heads, and there's pages and pages and pages of how you have to handle that in the in NFPA 13, and we don't have to worry about that right now. All right, let's see actuation. That might be interesting to read. Automatic sprinkler systems shall be automatically actuated. Well, that makes sense. And the idea is that they go off all by themselves and without intervention. You can't have there's different kinds of systems. For instance, a dry system, and we've had to do that. We've had to have put in some dry systems in one place or another recently. And the idea is you don't want the sprinkler pipes to freeze, but okay, so you have to have compressed air, and then when a sprinkler head opens, it's the same old sprinkler head that was before. The pressure